Hello. How's everybody doing? Um, Still bouncing around from Airbnb to Airbnb here. Um, but wanted to jump on tonight for a couple of reasons. Number one, stay tuned. We're going to have an exciting um, change of format tomorrow. Going to have a guest on, so stay tuned for that. I'm pretty excited. We're going to talk Conclave. We're going to talk SJs. If you haven't seen the movie Conclave, try to watch it between now and then, or at least before you watch the video, because I don't want to spoil anything for you. Okay, so stay tuned for that. So that's going to be today's Monday, so that's going to be Tuesday, February 4th, for those of you staying on top of this stuff. Okay, so tonight I wanted to talk about a couple of topics that sort of intermeshed over the last couple of days. Number one, friend of the channel, Shane Starr, put out a video either last night or a couple of days ago about the different functions and, looking at a piece of art or, and how you sort of look at art through the different functions and what they might be doing with a particular piece. And the thing that hit me is that it's these days it's actually kind of hard to talk about how TI interprets or analyzes art, which used to not be the case. For hundreds and hundreds of years, art was a very TI thing, and I'm going to throw music and art in there. And coincidentally, all of that change happened in large part because of tariffs. And tariffs are all the rage right now. If you're following the economic and financial news of what's going on in the U.S. at least. So in a sort of sort of way, I want to sort of combine all these things and let you know where I'm coming from and how tariffs completely killed TI and its application to the art, to the arts, I should say. All right, so where to start? So way back when, if you go back and you look at the classical period, the Baroque period of art and music, and even to some extent the Romantic period, then the modern period, shortly following the Romantic period, there was a very TI analytical, objective approach to art appreciation, analyzing art, in the sense that beauty, whether or not a piece was beautiful, whether it was music or painting or sculpture, largely depended on whether it met certain objective criteria, right? And with the idea being that there's certain criteria, there are certain things about a piece of music or a piece of art or a sculpture that sort of creates beauty, right? And and you can analyze it, right? In music, you can look at sort of the musical theory. You can look at how does the melody evolve into counterpoints and things like that. And it's all very sophisticated, and it's a very TI kind of process. And of course, the masters were masters of following these formula and sort of rejiggering them to make them work in different ways. And there was this idea that that there's these forms or these formula out there that you as an artist are trying to master, right? And it's and it's a very TI analytical, logical proposition. Like you could actually declare the propositions. You could say them out loud. You could articulate them. There are certain rules that can be articulated. It wasn't just, man, this really sounds cool, or man, that really looks good. You could break it down into it's various elements or components and articulate it. So for artwork, you could talk about the form and the contrast and the symmetry and the contrast in colors and the lighting, and you look at like the old Dutch masters and the way that they were able to capture lighting, and everything looks very realistic and very cool. And that could all be reduced down to criteria, and what we would consider objective criteria. Okay, it wasn't just one person happened to think that these chords sound really good together. It was sort of this collective understanding, or sort of philosophy in academia and whatnot, that these chords work together, and they work together in this way, and these modes in music work together in this way, and if you follow this mode, you're going to get this kind of song, and if you follow that mode, you're going to get that kind of song. Very, very articulate. It's important to point out that you can articulate this, right? It wasn't just that I thought it sounded cool. It was like there were actual rules that you could follow, pretty close to mathematical rules, in sculpture and painting and music and whatnot, theater, poetry, all of that kind of stuff. And so to be a master of it was to, figure out those rules, but also be able to tinker with it and sort of put your own little frills and bows on top of it, but still stay true to the underlying scheme, right? Okay. So by and large, art was a very, very TI process. And art appreciation and all of that was very, very TI, and you had kings and emperors, writing sonnets and writing fugues and musical pieces, because they wanted to show, hey, if I'm this smart and I can write a piece of music, imagine what I can do on the battlefield. Like even military, fights and engagements were very TI. They were very, like, they had these rules that you're supposed to follow, declarative rules. And so in sort of talking with famous people, or Eric's parlance, it was basically, a TI being how does he put it? I'm blinking on the phrase that he uses, but basically, that it's objective, and it's, disassociated from, your personal subjective, feelings or desires or wants. Disassociated calculus, is that what it is? Anyway, somebody put a comment. Let me remind me what it is. Okay, so somebody left a comment here. Modern society to me seems like all TE, and that is exactly where I'm going, but I'm going to walk you through where I'm going here. Okay, so very, very TI. Yeah, there's some SI because you have to use SI to remember what the rules are, but you need TI to do the logical processing, right? Is it disassociated calculus? Anyways, but the idea being that it's objective, that there are objective rules about what was beautiful and what was, sort of acceptable art at the time. And they follow these logical TI rules. They follow these objective criteria. When I say objective, I mean, what we really mean by objective, in the sense of, a third party, an independent third party would come to the same conclusion as you, right? We have objective criteria, just like if you're measuring how a company did earnings per share or net profit, if I give you the numbers, you're going to come out with the same numbers that I did, right? Because it's an objective formula. figuring this stuff out. There's no subjective, wishy-washiness in there. It's just a formula we follow. And so if you really knew art and you really knew the rules to be followed and how composition is supposed to work, and you were one of the masters, then, objectively, your interpretation of a work of art would be the same as anybody else that's sort of at your level. Right now, it's a question of whether or not people are at the same level. But the idea being that there is some objective criteria here. It's not just, how does it make me feel and does it sound cool, right? Okay. So that was art in large part up until around, the early 1900s, when we start getting into the modernists and the postmodern movement and Dadaism and all that kind of stuff. And there's lots of explanations of why we got there. The world was crazy. There was a bunch of world wars going on, and they were just like catastrophically horrible. And a lot of people started, not believing in the institutions or trusting the institutions or trusting the rules, right? And so what you had was a bunch of ENFPs, I'm going to say, sort of leading the charge on, there are no rules, man. Art is whatever, the point of art and the purpose of art is to evoke feeling. It's this expressionism sort of approach where we're not trying to find rules, we're not trying to find beauty. We're here to make you feel something, and that's ultimately what art is, and it's kind of what we think of art is still to this day. Now, a lot of it was because the camera came out around then, and a lot of people blame the camera because now all of a sudden, what's the point of having somebody who can paint when all you have to do is just take a picture and you've got the portrait, right? So what's the point of using a painter to paint portraits anymore? They had to sort of move on and start doing other things. And so you got Impressionism and all the stuff that came out of that. Okay. So tariffs. Where do tariffs come in? So this is my introduction to this art class that I teach periodically. And we always talk about these two tariff cases when we talk about what is art. And it's early in the 1900s. So again, postmodernism is starting to come out. Modernism's there, postmodernism, Dadaism, all that kind of like there are no rules, man. Approach to art started coming out. And what ended up happening is back in the day, there were a bunch of tariffs in the same way that Trump likes to remember fondly of, McKinley and all these presidents that would set tariffs. And sort of throw our weight around the economic stage, right? And so there are a ton of tariffs, and everything would be charged differently, had a different tariff. And there were cheaper tariffs for works of art because there was this idea that we wanted to encourage importing art from other countries, where sort of the masters are the Italians and the French. So the tariffs on art were relatively cheap, but the tariffs on like commodities and, just sort of, raw materials were pretty high. So if you were a contractor or if you were building something and you were smart, what you could do, let's say you needed marble, right? You could go and have an artist in Italy carve up some marble into some sort of statue, right? Or some sort of work of art. And then you can import that marble for cheaper than if it was just a block of marble, right? Because if it was just a block of marble and it was just a commodity, the tariff was higher. It was like 50% or something. But if you import the same amount of marble, but it's a piece of art, then you can import it for like a 20% tariff, right? So if you're smart, you would do that, and then you get the marble and this piece of art, and then oopsie, I broke I broke the piece of art, so we might as well just use the marble for this, building that I'm building or whatever, right? And so there was this real, so they had all these laws and all these rules, again, these TI rules about what was art versus something else, right? Because they knew everybody was trying to game the system. And so they would keep sort of piling on rules upon rules about what made something art versus anything else. And so there were rules like, it had to come from somebody who was actually an artist, that was known for, publicly known for being an artist, that, in whatever country they lived in. Various other things. You could only import, up to like 12 of the same thing, that kind of thing. But one rule early on was that whatever it was, it had to look like what the art was supposed to be depicting, right? So if you were getting like a marble statue of Venus, let's say, then it should look like Venus. It should represent Venus. Somebody should be able to look at it and say, oh yeah, that looks just like, a statue of Venus. So that way, it was a little easier to tell what was art versus just sort of a blob of nothingness, right? So that started to get challenged because you started having these artists out there who were more abstract. And the most famous one is this Brancusi, Brancusi, versus the United States. And this was like a real famous trial where they brought in all the art experts. Because what happened was the artist, I think he was from one of the Eastern Bloc countries, like Slovenia or something like that. I forget which one. But he was an abstract artist, and he built this sculpture that was called Bird in Space. But it's just sort of this long brass cylinder almost. It almost looks like a round feather. And you can look at it and you can say, okay, I guess I kind of see a bird flying in space, but not really. Like if somebody just showed it to me, I wouldn't be able to guess that right away. So look it up yourself. You'll be able to see what I'm talking about. It's called Bird in Space. And so it, got dinged as not being a work of art because it didn't resemble what it was supposed to be, right? So this went to court, and you had, all these art experts from all over, in their berets and their black turtlenecks and their pipes. You just imagine like 30 of these guys just lined up, to testify in court about what is and what isn't art, right? And so the court finally sort of had to agree on, sort of First Amendment grounds, free speech, that kind of thing, that you can't really define art. You can't really say that art has to resemble whatever it's depicting or whatever, right? That art, people should be able to express themselves however they want, and it should be considered art. There were still some rules, but they had to get rid of some of them. And then, ever since then, is what we've seen sort of the decline, of TI analytical view of art and art appreciation, right? Where it's become more of, all right, new place here, trying to figure out best way to orient myself. But anyways, it's become more of, expressionism, and it's switched over from TI to FI, right? Like, how does it make me feel? And as one commenter here has already sort of guessed or pointed out, I think it's actually gone even from FI to now TE, and it's about how much money can I make. It's about the process, right? It's not about what do I, how do I analyze this on sort of objective criteria? Does it meet certain criteria for beauty, No, nobody cares about that. How does it make me feel? You could have your favorite songs and stuff, but nobody really cares all that much outside of you and maybe a couple of your friends. But ultimately, what gets everybody's attention and what really runs the day is this TE. How can I make money off of it? Which is sad but true. So for those of TI users out there that want to restore, the old objective way of analyzing beauty and aesthetics and all of that when it comes to art, go for it, because we sorely need you out there. But it just goes to show, I just think it's a perfect example of how to think about these cognitive functions in more than just what personality type do they create, or how do you find Lady Gaga's personality or something like that. But more in the sense of like it can actually change history. It can change culture in very meaningful ways. And again, I am dead positive that the people running the show were a bunch of ENFPs, right? They were TI polar. They did not like to analyze art based off of objective, disassociated calculus, right? They wanted to put their own opinion, and talk about, not talk about it in terms of analytics and can we look at, independent objective criteria to determine, how valuable this piece of art is, but to just look at all these other sort of subjective things, right? And so then it became, who just had the best eye or who had the best story to tell when it came to these subjective criteria. And then, of course, when Andy Warhol came around and everybody figured out that now it's just about consumerism. It's not even about how it makes me feel. It's about what can I sell. And again, you just sort of see it sort of move along these different functions of what seems important when it comes to art. So, okay, enough rambling. I just thought it was sort of an interesting idea. It tied to one of my favorite cases out there, this Brancusi case, and moments in history of when you had all these pipe smoking Frenchmen showing up to the New York courthouse to tell the judge what's what about whether something is art or not, and how this was the time of Lachamp and and the Fountain. If you're not sure what Duchamp and the Fountain are, look it up. It'll give you a giggle. Very un-TI and very FI and very NE, very NE. And so that's why these ENFPs were running the show. Then of course it bled into Derrida and Foucault and all the French, postmodern thinkers about how there are no rules. There's no objective truth. It's all just, power struggle and, the narrative, the grand narrative that is being shoved down everybody's throats. So ENFPs, you've had your run. I think the INTPs, the ENTPs, the ISTPs, we need a resurgence of you guys in the art world. So if you have any interest, you should look into it, because there's probably a lot of space there for you. Okay, talk to everybody later. Bye.